Now it's time for Q&A. Michelle Diieson, MED, and Saki Iwamoto, Health and Wellness Educator, will be answering questions about their presentation, STEAM with Families at Boston Children's Museum. Sarah Pedanti, MED, and Dr. Kellen Reed are the moderators.
Thanks, everyone, and welcome to this Q&A session. We're so glad you could be here, and especially to Saki and Michelle for being here and for everything you've done since you've been with us from the beginning with planning this. So thank you for that. As was mentioned, we have a Q&A open at the bottom of your bars. We've already got some questions. I know I have some questions of my own too, but we'll start with the audience questions. And so again, I'm Kellen. Sarah is here with me to help moderate, and we'll be sharing some of that role. And so first question, do you have any tips for child-led virtual programming? In our current circumstances, it seems much more difficult to allow children to follow their interests organically.
I can start. So in terms of a virtual program, I definitely do see the challenge, and I think we share a lot of the challenges ourselves too. At Boston Children's Museum, we have not done too many of a sort of like a live, sort of like a Zoom virtual classes type of things. A lot of things are pre-recorded, and families can access at any time, which has its own advantage because families have a different schedule. Kids might have a different interest at different time. So like if we say, come to this program at 1, like the child is like, no, I'm not in the mood of that, versus if they can do it anytime, that helps to sort of tap into that child's interests and needs whenever that works for the child. But if a program has to happen virtually for whatever reasons, we have done some experiment, so it's not necessarily out in the public, but experiment with some families so that we can test out a potential virtual live program. And with that, sort of, that was more for the older kids, so there's slight difference with sort of 5 and under target age. But we introduced like different tools that we can do during the program. But then again, from there, kids can sort of like take off doing things that are, slightly directed, but not super directed. So child can kind of do whatever. And we asked that the child, it was set up sort of in front of the camera, and maybe their parents or caregivers ask some questions or comment on it throughout the program. But again, sort of not like interrupting like what the child might be doing at that time. So I think there are different approaches to this. I don't know if Michelle has anything to add.
I think you did a really nice job, especially thinking of our 5 and unders. Like Saki mentioned, we do also some recommended programming for older children, and that, is a very different way to work and set things up. But as far as most of what we've been doing and posting virtually are through our YouTube channel and our Instructables.
And Saki and Michelle, I thought that Aubrey's question about virtual programming as a parent who's also doing virtual instruction with my child right now was so thoughtful. Does Boston Children's Museum have any virtual resources for parents that would like to talk about what it might look like to visit the museum with their child one day, or help create similar activities at home?
So you mean like if they want to visit the museum, like is there anything they can like ask us about, or?
Yeah, if there's any sort of virtual resources for them to see parts of the museum or be able to discuss what a trip would look like. I'm thinking of the kinds of social stories that some children with ASD benefit from to sort of pre-discuss activities and trips.
Yep. So we actually do have the social story that discuss what it's like to visit the museum, especially during this time. We always had a social story, but that was more about visiting the museum during non-COVID time. So we modified it and added sort of different things that people need to be aware of, such as wearing a mask, social distancing, things like that, in a way that is hopefully friendly for the type of audience that we serve. It's available online in our Q&A section of our like a reopening page. But I'm happy to share the link with anyone who are interested. It's available on our website in a PDF format. We also have a virtual tour of the museum. Unfortunately, that is not necessarily reflecting all the small changes that we've made in response to COVID, but it's like mostly accurate. And if people have sort of wanna get sort of like a general sense of like what it's like to be in the museum, they can. And we post a lot of like pictures of like kids interacting with the exhibits. So if you access our like Facebook, Instagram page, you might also get some ideas of what it's like.
I'll go ahead and take the next question. We had one that asked just a little bit about, and a few participants have asked this, how STEAM and STEM may differ, and what sort of similarities they might have.
Yeah, I can talk a little bit to this one. So the major differentiation between STEM and STEAM, of course, is the A, which is art. And for us, that's a really important aspect to focus on. We feel like in STEM itself, there is actually a lot of art, and the process of art is really a big part of what's going on when you're mixing together things like science and technology and math. For us, it was important to really pull that out. In our space in the museum, we have a STEAM lab, and we also have an art lab, and that's something that we try to often fuse our programming together, so people can kind of start to see the link and flow. And really our major focus on it is that we really feel like having that very creative mind and really being able to manipulate materials and think outside the box, and certain aspects of things that we really think about when we think about art are things that we think work really well when you're talking about STEM disciplines and can really push and further those disciplines further.
Okay.
And working with very young children as well, art is a really great way for them to interact, and it's something that a lot of young children are very naturally drawn to. So it's also a way to even start getting them into the STEM world.
Excellent. Thanks, Michelle. Saki, did you have anything to add to that?
I think Michelle did a great job answering that. But I think a lot of families, and we hear it from adults, that, like they are themselves are afraid of like science and math and, that kind of topic, but a lot of them might also actually feel comfortable with art. And I think it's a good way, sort of doing STEAM is a good way to show to, especially those families, both kids and adults, that like science happens, well, I shouldn't say science, but like STEM happens through different formats, and the things that you might enjoy, if that's art, then there's actually a lot of connections to this. So I think there's another value like that.
Thank you. I think we've also heard that showcase like music maybe as a form of art and across the STEMIEFest, and the same sort of principles could still be applied. So yeah, it exists across many fields, that at least is how we categorize them. So we have another question. Would you say that STEAM techniques could be incorporated with STEM teachings? And this, I had a kind of a similar question. So, and Patricia, hopefully I'm paraphrasing correctly here, but maybe with the intentionality, assigning this or ascribing some intentionality around, STEM versus just kind of the open play. So are there techniques for incorporating and ascribing kind of the intentionality of STEM with these activities? And then for the last part of that question, if so, how could that be done?
Yeah, this is a very interesting question. So what I see as the STEAM techniques, I see that as a very similar, if not the same, as STEM teachings, especially in the museum when we're working with very young children. The main idea is that we're not trying to have an end learning result. It's more about the exploration, the play, getting their hands on things, seeing how they interact. And it has a very different, especially if you're thinking STEM with older children in particular, there tends to be a lot more what people are focusing on, so they have an idea of an end goal and then learning goal. And so I think using the STEAM techniques for us are the habits of mind and skills. And we really keep those in mind for all of our programming, starting with our youngest visitors up to our oldest visitors, who are normally about 10. And really incorporating those in and really trying to keep the focus there, even when we're working with our older children in the museum, talking to parents and caregivers about the fact that we're really focused on building these habits of mind and skills versus trying to say by the time they walk out of the door, they will know X.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to build into the activity almost.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep. I also want to really stress the importance of play. Play can be like, easily said, oh, kids are just playing, like they're messing around with things. But there are actually a lot of value to that also informs STEM. Even if we are not necessarily saying like, look, your kid is learning XYZ kind of thing. And in fact, Bay Area Discovery Museum, they have this sort of research center called Center for Childhood Creativity. And they put together this document that is available on their website. It's called The Roots of STEM Success. And in there, they talk about to become STEM thinkers, children need more play. And also active and self-directed learning builds STEM skills and interests. So I do see that the sort of need to we have to incorporate the goals and what the facts, what facts that kids are learning. And I totally understand the art, but I also really want to stress, especially for kids as young as 5 and under, is that even if you're just focusing on play, it actually does have a lot of value in terms of STEM.
Mm-hmm. And you've got a kudos, a hooray for the play in the chat. I just noticed that.
Okay, well, thank you, Patricia, for that question. I just shared a link to the Bay Children's resource that I think Saki was referencing, in case anyone's interested in reading it. It looks like a great read on this topic. So I'll go ahead to the next question from Maria about what have been your best Messy Mondays projects?
That's a good question. We have so many Messy Monday projects. I think one really exciting one we can do in the summer when it's really warm is playing with mud and exploring mud, and just giving different tools for things for kids to play with, giving them smocks if caregivers are comfortable letting their child submerge in a pool of mud. We have that as an option. That one is really good. We have another one. A lot of times with Messy Monday, it's really taking simple, sometimes everyday materials. We do a lot of activities with shaving cream. So using shaving cream and connecting little blocks together and building with it and even just squishing it and being able to feel it in your hands is really great. We have another one where we have toilet paper palooza and we just pull out a few rolls of toilet paper and let kids go and see. We give them an area to stay in and they just go to town rolling it, ripping it, wrapping it around things, seeing all the things they can do with it. And we do a lot with paint as well. So putting paint on different objects, what happens if you have bubble wrap or paint brushes or stamps or random materials that we'll find around the museum so they can see kind of what different textures will do. Saki, I don't know if you have any other favorites you'd like to add.
I definitely like all the things that you mentioned, but I think I want to add ice. Ice is definitely a good thing, and most families also have it at home too. And it's kind of funny that a lot of people think we invented ice. We didn't, of course, but it doesn't always come to people's mind that ice is something that they can actually play with the kids, and kids actually spend a lot of time playing with ice. So just kind of showing some example of this is something you would probably have at home, and there are different ways to play with it, including some kitchen utensils like little measuring spoon or spatula, whatever. And again, combining that with things like ice and showing that in a bigger scale at the museum seems to be also informing families in a smaller scale what they can do. And in terms of toilet paper palooza, which is definitely my favorite. It's so crazy and fun. It's also like something that is available at home if parents want to allow kids to do it. But even if not, like it gives kids the opportunity, like, okay, this is not something you can always do at home. But this is a fun, special opportunity to do it in a museum. So I love those two activities.
Yeah, so mental note, don't invite Saki over for Halloween with the toilet paper palooza, or anyone from the Boston Children's Museum on a Monday. Got it. So we have, actually, I'm going to skip. Someone just asked a question that might be timely for what we just talked about. So we'll come back to the other one. Can you, Maria asked if you could elaborate on ice play.
So I can talk a little bit about this ice play. What we do is we'll make different sizes of ice. We prep in advance, so sometimes we'll put it in small Dixie cups. So if someone wants to play with individual small ice, we also sometimes get big Play-Doh containers and we'll make giant batches of ice. We like to freeze toys or leaves and natural objects inside of it, sometimes putting food coloring. And when we bring the ice out, we'll put out pieces of ice along.
We can also freeze ice in like different things, and just like kids can enjoy how it comes out. Like, maybe it can be like surgical gloves, and you put like water in it, just kind of tie it together and then put it in the freezer. You get a bunch of like hands, or you might pour some water in a milk jar or something like that, and then you get like some interesting shaped ice. As Michelle said, you can like drop different color either in it or on top of it as it melts. It's also fun. You can also sprinkle like other things like salt. Like what if like you sprinkle salt? So you just kind of prepare materials that could be safely sprinkled on top of the ice. There are just so many things that you can do. But I think especially for younger kids, just really by having like ice out with some tools alone can actually occupy a lot of the child's time.
As Saki and Michelle, I'll add that I used to live and work in Boston and bring students to the Children's Museum quite often. And we really just enjoyed every time it snowed, going out into the snowbanks with different water containers with colored water that had salt in it, and using eyedroppers or basters or other instruments to add that to the snow and to watch that melt. So if you are in an area that gets some snow and ice, that's a great way to explore as well. All right, so I think it might be okay for us to go on to this last question. It looks like we just got another one too, so great. I'll take this one and Kellen can take the next. This is how you can think about guiding adults and facilitating children's exploration of STEAM.
Mm-hmm. I can speak to a little bit of this, Saki. So our big thing with adults is really encouraging them to go in with a mindset of really thinking about those STEAM skills and habits of mind, and really encouraging, again, the play and the exploration. So instead of trying to get at, we talk about this a lot with our science program manager, instead of trying to always say why is this happening, how do batteries work, really letting the child explore and just asking them, like, what do you notice is happening? What do you see? And really letting them kind of direct their flow and their learning as far as like what they're being drawn to, what they're being excited by, and then really following them on their pathway. To really encourage them. So I say like, oh, that is really interesting. Like, I wonder what would happen if we did this. And always reminding, we talk to adults a lot about questioning, just always questioning the child, really drawing them into the exploration, and help really giving them that openness to see what's going on in the activity they're doing, and just knowing that there's no one end goal that they're going for. The child sometimes they will get into something that we didn't even realize was something that a child would be interested in or notice, and it's just amazing what they come up with. So really encouraging adults to ask questions and really hear what the child is seeing and exploring and going with them on that path with them.
That's great. I was also wondering if it's been your experience with the adults that are there. Do you see many adults who are uncomfortable with these kind of concepts and topics, and how do you help support them in understanding what it is you're doing and the importance of it? Are there any supports or information, any activities you have for adults around this to support the parent or caregiver?
Yeah, I can answer that. So in terms of adults who are uncomfortable, a lot of times that's when we are doing things that's incredibly messy, especially where it's like very easily get spotted by the child, and now they have to say no to the child, and it becomes the whole thing, which we totally understand. But we are doing this because there is a value. So in such cases, like we have some, well, not right now because of COVID, but in general, we have some smocks available, so that they don't have to get their clothes dirty as much. Or if there are things that like they don't want to touch, or they're worried about, either adults are worried about being messy, or sometimes kids have some like a sensory sort of avoidance of certain types of texture and such. So we try to add sort of a different pathway to engage with the activities. If you don't want to do with hands, if you don't want your child to get too close to this, here's a different way to engage. But it is still important that your child is engaging in it, and then just kind of gently talk about why. Of course, we don't want to be preaching. We have to meet where the adults are, and that is also valuable. Like they have their own value and understanding of how things work, so we have to respect that. So of course, like we never say like no, like you are wrong. It's more that this is how we see the value, and then this is a way that we can sort of give you the options to, so that you can still engage but also addressing some of your concerns, if that makes sense.
Yes, wonderful. Thank you. All right, and so that was my own question to add on to the other one. So here's another audience question from John. Do you have methods of making your activities accessible to children with disabilities? And then I might broaden it also, and just in general, how are you accommodating or including children with disabilities? I know that's something that you do. So what does that look like?
So in terms of open-ended type of activities, we try to sort of like add to like different heights, so it's not all happening on the ground, for kids who use wheelchairs, or if there are certain things that need to be communicated, it's communicated in like a different ways. Not sometimes like staff might talk to them. There might be different signs with like pictures, but as long as the activity is like open-ended, there's typically like no instruction beyond maybe some like safety things. And again, I think we take value that we don't necessarily say do this in this exact steps, otherwise you fail kind of thing. It's more that here are a whole bunch of cups and see what you can come up with it. And kids with different abilities might engage maybe very different ways from maybe typically developing kids. But that is okay. Like there are staff who are going to like embrace like, what the child is doing no matter what, again, as long as it's safe. And we do train our staff to be able to facilitate the activities and also understand different needs, have conversations with each family, addressing sort of like how they can engage with the activity. But again, I think my big focus is that, again, especially for younger kids, is that it's not necessarily about if they're doing things right or wrong. It's more about embracing what the child is capable of doing and what they are doing given the material that is presented to them. So of course there are considerations of like things that are easier to grip, not just like something like super thin, or again like adding to different heights so that there is enough ways to enter the activity. But as long as they can enter the activity, then from there, it's really up to the child to take it wherever they want to take it to.
Yeah, so some of that accommodation is in the design too of the activity, not necessarily just the back end kinds of accommodation.
Yeah, and also the staff's mindset.
Yes,
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for addressing that, Saki. So we'll go on to the next question. And this is from Misty. What are a few ideas for tools you recommend using with young children? And I'll take a liberty, Misty, and say that in this case, we're talking about tools like construction tools that children might be experimenting with, like hammers. And feel free to comment in chat if it's a little bit different.
Mm-hmm. We like to use a really wide variety of tools, and we like to put out a lot at the same time so that children can really explore and try different things. When we're doing activities, we try to make sure that we have, even within the same type of tool, like scissors. We might have more traditional child scissors, and then also offer adaptive scissors, which, if someone is still working on their scissor skills or has trouble with their fine motor skills for their hands, that gives them the opportunity to partake in a program, just using a slightly different way. Same thing with things like paintbrushes, offering different sizes. Some of them are nice and thick, some of them are a little bit thinner. So we definitely like to put out a variety so that other children are seeing a wide variety, and it becomes very normal. A lot of times, especially with the adaptive scissors, some children aren't very familiar with those, so when they see them, they get excited about trying them, and then you can talk to them about why we have adaptive scissors and what they like about them and what they notice. And Saki, you might have some more to add in particular of tools that you like to play with.
Yeah, we can think about tools in different ways, but if there are tools that one might think is more for adults or older kids, there are often ways to make it safer in a way, in terms of hammer and nail. Of course, you don't want to give a 3-year-old a real hammer and super sharp nail. But what you could do is to take those crab mallet, those a light wooden mallet thing, and with the golf key, which is just also plastic, but it's not very sharp. And then we like to hammer into Play-Doh or styrofoam or whatever that's soft enough that you can bang things into.
Pumpkin.
Yeah, pumpkin is super fun
I was
to
about to interject pumpkin. It's a great time of year for that.
yeah. Pumpkin, malleting, dissecting, all the thing.
And that will entertain kids for hours sometimes. It's a very intrinsically motivating time.
And it's a little special because they're I can never touch hammer that my parents might be using around the home, maybe, just an example. But then I can use this one. So it sort of is a different version, but it's more accessible version for everyone. Same for knife, sharp knife versus the butter knife or plastic knife, which seem like an easy alternative, but it's not something that not everyone thinks about. And sometimes I talk about if you think about it, your child can actually cut up bananas with dull, plastic knife. So that we are not always saying no to certain tools that adults are using that kids are typically fascinated by.
Right. And that mastery motivation for children to do things like cut their own soft foods themselves is really wonderful to see how it builds their confidence. So thanks, Michelle and Saki, for sharing. I'm going to turn it over to Kellen for the next question.
Yeah, and I think we have just a couple more minutes. We have a couple more questions. Then the next question I actually might kick back out to our question asker. So Marie just asked, what does STEM look like for children with severe or multiple disabilities? And I think that's a big question. And I'm wondering if you could break down because STEM I think would look the same, if I could just jump in, for children with disabilities or without. So do you mean STEM activities? Maybe just in the chat, break that down a little bit more for us. I don't know if Saki or Michelle, maybe we'll just go to the next question and hopefully we'll have a little more clarification on the question. Does that sound fair? Okay, so for Maria, I love your critical thinking and investigation programs with the magnets, tubes, balls, and yarns. Do you have more ideas along this line?
toilet paper. I mean, there are a lot. Like we can play with like boxes. Boxes are usually a big hit. I think we might have mentioned shaving cream, but again, like that's crazy, but fun. If you don't want to get too crazy, I recommend that you do it in the bathroom. That's something else. I mean, like there are so many. Like you can use like bed sheets. There are different ways to engage with those cups, spoons. I mean, there are really a lot, like dowels, any kind of like sticks that you might have at home you can use. There are some inspiration maybe on our website. I also noticed the other day on the 023 website, so there's an organization called 023. And on their website, there's this series that I think they recently started, like 5 ways you can play with X. And the X will be something that is usually easy to find around the home. I also recommend that you check it out. There are a lot of good ideas there. I don't know if Michelle, if you have anything else.
I think you hit a lot of our top favorites. I think there's also a lot of things that we combine. So, for example, cups is a really popular, exciting one. It's like really amazing how much you can do with cups. And if you just put out a bunch of cups to see stacking and lining up and putting things back together. But then also taking a cup, putting it in front of a fan, trying different materials in front of fans. Wind play is definitely one of our fan favorites from our younger audience. And we do a lot, there's a lot with light and shadow you can play with. They're really interested in just kind of playing with what different shapes look like, what they can do with their hands in front of lights. And Saki mentioned the bath. Water play is something that we do a lot at the museum, and definitely something that people can then take home and do themselves.
All right, and we're at time. I just want to recap real quick and just a follow-up quick question for Maria on this. And were those activities that you described on your website, or are there other places that you might recommend linking out that we could link others to with similar things?
Yeah. For the actual activities, I would recommend looking at the Boston Children's Museum YouTube page, our Facebook page, or our Instagram, and also Instructables. We have a few activity write-ups that, for example, ice play is one of our Instructables, where we'll really talk about different things you can do with ice and how to get all that prep together.
All right, thank you. And I want to respect everyone's time and follow back to Marita's question. We didn't get any other clarification, but I think in general we would think that the STEM would look the same. But of course, the families, caregivers, practitioners might need to adapt the environment, materials or instruction to better engage children with those activities. So
yeah, I just wanted to point her to a blog post that we have in STEMI that's about storybook adaptations, including those for children who may have more significant intellectual, cognitive, motor impairment, and hopefully that can be sort of a place for her to start.
All right, and we are now into the break. So thank you again.
Thank you so much, Saki and Michelle.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you.